Good evening and welcome to tonight's lockdown learning event. My name is Bren Carlil and I am the Director of Public Affairs at the Zionist Federation of Australia. We are delighted to have secured Eman Amasha this evening after a few false starts a couple of weeks ago, including a global meltdown at Zoom's end and some unexpected scheduling issues at our end. However, Eman is now here tonight, so we are looking forward to this conversation. The reason I'm really looking forward to hearing from Eman tonight is the number of roles that she embodies, both now and I am the Director of Public Past. She represents the Jewish state, but is a member of a minority society within Israel. She's a diplomat here in a role that really centers on getting out and meeting people in a time of pandemic when doing so is not really allowed. And she has played a role at home in helping her society better integrate into the majority Israeli society and help the various communities in Israel better understand each other. Eman will be speaking tonight with Emily Gian, who is the Director of Communications at the ZFA and is well known to many of you. Now, before I hand you over to Emily, I just want to say that next week we're doing something slightly different. We're going to have a panel discussion. My majority Israeli society and help the various communities in Israel better. Sorry, there's a... Eman will be speaking tonight with Emily Gian, who is the Sorry about that. So next week we're going to have a panel discussion. Suddenly I felt the Facebook page coming back at me. Now we just need to confirm the last few details of the panel discussion. So I don't want to give you any details yet, except to say that it will be at 7 p.m. next week instead of the usual 8 p.m. So those details out of the way, I'm going to hand the conversation over to Emily. Emily.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Eman, and thank you very much for speaking to us tonight. How are you going? Now that we're on the other side of lockdown, or I suppose Canberra is, Melbourne might not be on the other side of lockdown as we thought, how has it been being in isolation in another country during the COVID crisis, and how has it affected your work at the embassy?
So good evening, both Emily and Bren, and I thank you both very much, first of all, for the introduction. And of course, I'm honored to take part in your lockdown learning sessions. We all in the embassy, by the way, have been taking part in your lockdown learning in the sessions, and we've been following them really very closely. And we're happy to share, and we've been very happy to share them and post them on our platforms as well. So following your question, Emily, I'm fine, I'm well. It's been quite hectic actually for us, the weeks of the corona pandemic. In a way, I have to say that it opened, we didn't expect that, but it opened new opportunities for us. You know, this whole online interaction and online opportunities to connect and to interact also with distant communities and cities around Australia. You know, we're here in Canberra, the embassy is here, and we don't always get the chance to be in direct touch with really very valuable communities and partners around the continent. But during the past few weeks, this online Zoom webinars and Zoom meetings has enabled us to be even in a closer connection with them. So in a way, it was quite blessed, if I may say that, about some difficult days, of course, that we all went through. But in this regard, yes, we did much during the past few weeks.
Yeah, I think that this period of time has certainly given us all a bit of a chance to firstly reflect, but also be a little bit innovative with what we do and how we do things. And as the CEO of the ZFA, Janet Sell, has been saying since we've started to go back, you know, that the new normal is going to be some sort of a hybrid between what we were doing before and what we're doing now. And so it's good to see that it's been okay also in the embassy to be able to adjust. So you currently serve as the spokeswoman and the attaché for cultural and academic affairs, as well as being responsible for public diplomacy. Can you elaborate a little bit further on about that role?
Yeah, so actually being a cultural, the attaché for cultural and academic affairs is a part, as my, being the spokesperson of the embassy, is all a part actually of what is called public diplomacy. And this would as well include different types of collaborations with the local Jewish community and its main organizations. And so in international relations, public diplomacy, broadly speaking, is any government or embassy sponsored efforts aimed at communicating directly with the foreign publics, the Australian public in this case, of course, when the main goal is actually to establish a direct dialogue designed to inform and influence different local audiences. For instance, Emily, if I may, one of the very important issues that the embassy tried to promote, facilitate, and even enhance during the days of the corona pandemic have been the exchange of know-how and mutual learning between Australian and Israeli universities and prominent academic institutions, as both countries are working to provide the best care and support for their people. Another way, a very relevant example of public diplomacy is the embassy's efforts to increase awareness of the importance of combating anti-Semitism, for example, especially when, unfortunately, we all have witnessed increasing anti-Semitic incidents that may reflect the use of the COVID-19 pandemic as a pretext to attack Jews online and to spread anti-Jewish conspiracy theories, as we all have seen, unfortunately, of course.
Yeah, that's seen quite a lot of it, especially in the last few weeks, I suppose. So when did you arrive in Australia, and is this your first posting with the MFA, and what did you do before coming out to Australia?
So I arrived in Australia back in 2018, in August 2018. So in 2 months, I'll be here 2 years already. And this is actually my second posting. The first one was in Bulgaria, and where I served as the deputy ambassador there. And I'm here with my husband, Safi, who is the current defense attaché to Australia, and we have 3 kids, Yasmin, Maya, and Dean. So this is for it. Now, before my postings, I had the opportunity to work for different divisions and departments in the headquarters in Jerusalem, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For example, I worked for a while in the division for Central and South America division, Economic Affairs Division, in the Bureau for Middle Eastern Economic Affairs, Middle East and Peace Process Division, and the last one was before I had my first posting was Europe Division in the Department for European Union Organizations.
And what made you want to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to begin with? It doesn't seem like the career path that just anybody wants to be. So what specifically made you want to join?
In fact, I've got to admit that becoming a diplomat wasn't, if I may say, wasn't a childhood dream. But when I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs back in 2011, I realized back already that all I've ever done, studied and experienced till that very point have brought me to this very good place, to this position that actually allows me the privilege of learning, exploring, and contributing on a daily basis. Being an Israeli diplomat is usually very challenging, and professionally and personally speaking, but it's also very, very rewarding as well, allowing me to present different, often new perspectives of my country, of course, and of the very diverse and what I see as beautiful Israeli society. So it is a privilege, really.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So we all have we all have many different identities, nationality, ethnic, religious, community, familial, gender. How does your Druze identity fit in with all of your other identities? And could you also just tell us a little bit about the Druze society in Israel?
Yes, of course. So since I got here to Australia, Emily, I realized that many Australian counterparts and friends, including, by the way, members of the local Jewish community, haven't actually heard much about the Druze, the Druze society in Israel and in the Middle East, generally speaking. So if you'd allow me, of course, I'll be happy to take this opportunity to give a brief introduction about my people. So the Druze is a religious, esoteric, secretive group, and self-identified as Unitarians. In Arabic, we're referred to as Muwahidun, which may also mean the monotheists. Jethro of Midian, who might be referred as well as Moses' father-in-law by some, is one of our spiritual founders and a chief prophet. The Druze religion is based, among other things, on the teachings of Akhenaten and on the teachings of Hamza ibn Ali, the Fatimi and the Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim. The Druze faith incorporates elements of Islam, but also of Judaism, Christianity, Neoplatonism, Pythagoreanism, and Buddhism that highlights the importance of the mind, and I mean by mind like wisdom and reason, as well as truthfulness, which is one of our religion's main principles and values, attempting by that to focus on the similarities rather than the differences between the different teachings and groups that I've just mentioned. We do believe, by the way, that different religions, including Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, are all supposed to complete and complement each other. So this is like our general perception of the differences between different groups. And instead, of course, and rather than contradicting each other. So this is really the very general, a very general background about the Druze people. I may add that, of course, we have our own social customs, and they differ markedly from those of Muslim, Christian, and Jews, and we are known to form a close-knit, cohesive society that doesn't allow anyone into it. I'm sorry to say. However, we do integrate fully in our homelands. So different countries around the Middle East, so besides Israel, you can find Druze communities also, Druze societies also in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Although a small group, the Druze society has been playing an important role on shaping the history of the Middle East and continues to play a large political role there nowadays. In Israel, for example, in spite of ongoing challenges, and by challenges, Emily, I mean the infrastructure gaps that our villages, and we have 16 villages around Israel, These villages still suffer, even nowadays, from historic severe budgetary constraints and deficit that our local municipalities still have to face these days. In spite of all these, of course, I'm very proud to say that I've witnessed endless progress for my people who've managed to integrate fully on all walks of life. And as you may see, there are Israeli Druze diplomats like myself and my husband, in a way. And currently we have 3 members of Knesset in different parties, and one of them happens to be the very first woman ever to become a member of Knesset, of whom I'm really very proud, Mrs. Ghadir Kamal Mrih. And we even used to have cabinet ministers as well. So this is a very, very general background about both Druze in Israel and maybe in the Middle East.
Yeah, yeah. And so I've heard that, or I've read that the Druze are sort of unique in the sense that they don't have national aspirations for a country of their own. So as you said, they're sort of integrated into the different countries that they live in. Is that something that is unique? And are there other ethnicities or religious groups that are always loyal to the country they're in?
So as I have mentioned, Emily, earlier, the Druze integrate fully in their homelands, either in Israel or other countries in the region. And this really goes back to the fact that the Druze people don't have national aspirations, as you've just mentioned, of a country of their own. So in recent years, though, and this is something that is worth emphasizing, the Druze generation has become more critical of what some of them feel as discrimination, that they sometimes feel they have to face also in Israeli society. We need to remember that still many of our lands have been confiscated during the years for public nature reserves, and we have regularly been denied building permits to expand. And that has forced some of us to actually build illegally, which is, I see as quite sad. The level of this untypical discontent that we all witnessed during the past, especially during the past 2 years, among Druze reached new heights in July 2018, when actually the Israeli government passed legislation that many Druze perceive as profoundly insulting. Of course, when I say many of them, I mean that others, also some other Druze, like just like in the general Israeli population, some of them actually don't find this law very problematic. So, you know, it's a democratic society. And, but as I said, some of them find this law as quite problematic. And when I say nation-state law, I actually mean the law that was designed to affirm Israel's position as the national home of the Jewish people.
Yeah, so I was actually just going to ask you, do you want to expand a little bit more on what the nation-state law was and what its intent was in terms of the various minorities? And was that intent reached, or do you think it backfired?
So among other provisions of the law that I've also just mentioned, the law specifies that the right to self-determination belongs to Jewish Israelis alone. So this is the main idea. It also downgrades Arabic from an official language to one that enjoys a special status. The nation-state law is what's known in Israel as a basic law, meaning it carries the weight of a constitutional amendment. The Druze in Israel were not the only people, by the way, and this is important to emphasize, to take issue with the law. But in August 2018, they did become the spearhead, if I may say, of the struggle. The Druze community, though, has a reputation for avoiding confrontation with the state. So the force of the protest has been unexpected because of that. We need to remember, Emily, that the Druze have lived and fought alongside their Jewish neighbors since before Israel's reborn in 1948, and their support for Jewish fighters contributed significantly to Israel's victory. In light of this history, many Jews see the nation state law as a personal affront. Supporters of the nation state law, however, some of them, by the way, are Druze as well, as I said before, reject the notion that it overlooks the contribution of the Druze or otherwise undermines their status in Israel. They argue that it has nothing to do with minority rights and that it merely strengthens the foundation of the state. And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu said back in August 2018, if I'm not mistaken, it was during one of his weekly cabinet meeting, that nobody, and he emphasized that nobody intends to harm individual rights, but without the nation state law, it will be impossible to ensure for generations the future of Israel as a Jewish nation state, and I'm quoting him in this regard. So this is very briefly what the nation state law is and how different communities in Israel, especially the Druze, refer to it.
Yeah, I can imagine that it may not have been easy. I think that we have actually this really beautiful video on the ZFA Facebook page, which was from August 2018, and it was from one of the protests that you were mentioning. I think it was maybe even in Tel Aviv, in Kikar Barabin, and they were protesting the law. And one of the religious leaders got up and talked about how, it really got to the heart of the matter about how they felt, about how loyal they've been to the state of Israel, how, they've served in the army, they've all of the stuff that they've done, and that they sort of, all that they want was to be treated equals. And I think the most poignant part of that whole protest was that at the end, the thousands of people in attendance got up and sang the Hatikvah, which is the national anthem of Israel. And I just thought that was so beautiful, because it really touched to the heart of exactly what they were saying. We're so loyal to the state, and we're hurt by this. So it made me start to think about the sort of the Jewish symbols of Israel. And we've actually also got a question on Facebook, which, funnily enough, but I did not plan, this is from Jack Craypot, who happens to be my dad, but he's sort of asked a similar question to what I was about to ask. So he's asked about how Israel has many minority groups, but its flag, anthem, and language make it clear it's a Jewish state. How do you feel about this as someone from a minority community, which is pretty much exactly what I was going to ask. Like, how do you feel singing the line, or not necessarily you, but the members of the Druze society, how do they feel singing the Hatikvah, having the flag with the Magen David, and if we could just touch on that.
Yeah, so this is really very important, even if it's quite sensitive, but I think that this question is quite very important, and I think that in spite of the complexity that I've briefly referred to in previous during the previous questions that you had, Emily, I think that there is a complexity, the complexity exists, and there is a kind of increasing cognitive dissonance, if I may refer to it as such, among the young Israeli Druze. nowadays when it comes to their national affiliation. So I have to admit that since the nation state law, I think that something is going on. I'm not sure if it has totally changed. No, it's not, but something is going on. But still, I think that it's very important to remember that the younger Druze generations continue to serve the state of Israel at great personal risk. Servers in Israel's army, in the IDF, Emily, stands at 60 to 65% among Israeli Jewish youngsters. But over 80% of young Druze men serve in the IDF, which is really very high percentage, still nowadays.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
Yeah, it is. But for the first time, higher numbers of young Druze are considering not serving in the army. I'm happy to say that it's not as, the figures are still not as high, but we do recognize a trend of increasing numbers in this regard. And these youngsters are actually complaining. Some of them complain that the nation state law reflected a lack of concern for the notion of democracy and equality. So more youngsters claim that this law makes them in a way look like mercenaries and not like soldiers fighting for the security and well-being of their homeland, of their country, of Israel. Now, following your question about the Hatikvah, of course, we sing the Hatikvah because it's the anthem of our country. We fully respect it, and I'm always touched, by it, especially when I'm representing Israel, abroad during my postings. And we have never, the Druze society in Israel have never had any problems with the Jewish symbols of the country, including its flag, of course, because Israel is the state of the Jewish people, and we've never had any problem with that. On the contrary, we support it, and we're in, we feel integral parts of Israel as it is. However, on the ground, today, I can say that there is more awareness among the younger Druze generation of their rights, and they are more critical and they are more demanding in these days, especially if we, compared to their parents and grandparents' generation. So this is, very briefly.
And so your mother tongue is Arabic. Does the Druze society have much to do with Christian and Muslim Arab communities in Israel? You touched on before that in terms of the society that no one can really come in, but you live in various communities that I would imagine would be nearby or adjacent to. So yeah, could you just touch on that a little bit as well?
So yes, of course. In Israel, minorities from a variety of different ethnic and religious groups have throughout history chosen to settle in the north part of Israel, in Galilee and on the Golan Heights, and of course Carmel Mountain, where I personally come from. So sometimes in the north you will find yourself in an Arab Muslim majority village, or in a hamlet that is nominally Christian. Some of these villages are largely Druze. Some are actually Caucasian, so it's quite diverse. And there are also multi-ethnic villages and towns such as Mghar and Shfar'am, where several separate groups are integrated and live quietly side by side. However, outside observers, Emily, might mistakenly think of minority groups in Israel as one single cohesive group. Yet in reality, there is a huge diversity of religious and cultural identity. And that, by the way, that very diversity is also apparent in the way these different groups that I've just mentioned relates and refer to Israel as their homeland. So it's quite diverse in this regard as well.
And in terms of like integrating those different communities into Israeli society, what do you think that the government could do a better job of integrating, or is there something else? Are there things at play?
Yes, so before I actually refer to integration, I think, as I just said, like different groups do equal different approaches. However, when it comes to the national political agenda, there are similarities between different minority groups and societies in Israel, and they're mostly, when it's mostly tribal, traditional, conservative societies and individuals' political decisions and choices, Emily, would mostly be affected and determined by the immediate family circle and the wider circle of family relatives. So despite the different ethnic groups, especially among the Arab society, the general Arab society, Israeli Arab society in Israel, we can see also these kind of similarities, in the way they refer in their political approaches. And only last would come, of course, the national elections for Knesset. However, during the very last elections that took place a few months ago, we all witnessed growing numbers of voters from the Arab, and when I say Arab, I mean mainly the Muslim and Christian minorities. And I do think that the Arab member of Knesset during the very last elections have realized that their approach needs to change. And when I say change, I mean by talking more about the issues that have to do with the Israeli Arab citizens, their rights, and their well-being, rather than those of the Palestinians. Now, concerning integration, I think that we should remember that, if I may say, it's like it takes two to tango. This is how I see it. I have witnessed myself the change in employment and higher education, related perceptions and norms in minority populations, including encouraging the employment of women while providing them the training. And for that purpose, the Israeli government has allocated millions for the advancement of the different development centers in different villages, and I mean employments and vocational centers, by also aiding the creation of small business and enterprise, providing professional training and guidance for entrepreneurs, including women. Of course, and even most importantly, establishing and creating also more daycare centers for the integration back into labor market for working moms. So I think that this happens also because the government has been allocating yes, more budgets for that, but also because of many changes that have been taking place within these minorities, these minority societies in Israel. So that's what I mean by saying you need two to tango. You need the government's, of course, efforts, but also these societies need to initiate their own, of course, change from within.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So we've been talking about the different identities. And I don't think that we can talk about identity without talking about your identity as a woman. So I just wanted to sort of see, in terms of discrimination against women, and also you just talked as well about like integrating women back into the workplace and things like that. Does this translate to increased discrimination against women, or is there a level of discrimination in Israel the same in all groups? And how does the Druze community fare in that sense?
So,
we'll go on that first.
okay, so I'm happy that you raised this question. I do believe that this is highly important, and I'm happy to that I have the opportunity to refer to that as well. Also as an Israeli diplomat, but as a woman as well. So thank you for that, Emily. So the thing is that this is really very, very broad subject. It is very important, but it's very broad. I'm not sure that if we'll have, if we'll be able to elaborate on them too much. But it is important to mention that during the last elections as well, and I mean the elections for local municipalities in Israel that took place something like, I think it was almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And back then, even back then, we already saw an increasing numbers of women come into power from various communities, including, by the way, the Druze and of course the Arab societies in Israel. For me, it was immensely exciting to witness. And I think that this is also, it is a testament to the hard work and advocacy for women in Israel. Sadly, however, and in spite of this very blessed trend as I see it, 7 Israeli women have been killed since the beginning of the corona pandemic. I have to admit that I haven't checked the figures here in Australia, but I think that it is very sad to see that this is, So
we've seen a sort of upward tick in domestic violence and women, and definitely the numbers have gone up during this crisis, sadly.
Yes, it is very sad, and we're talking, and these women, by the way, were mostly murdered by their husbands and partners. So they are, yes, victim of domestic violence. And it is true that there are resources and budgets and allocated by governments, and I know that this is right both for Israel and Australia, because both governments are really trying or hope to tackle domestic violence. However, on the ground, we can see that the figures and sad statistics indicate that there's still much to be done in this regard. So it's not only a matter of allocating budgets, but it's also and mainly a matter of raising awareness of this of the importance of tackling domestic violence. And I believe it starts mainly from education. It starts from home, but also from schools. And today, I took this Sunday morning, the time I had earlier today, to watch the movie of Michelle Obama. I'm not sure if you heard about it. It's called Becoming. It's now on Netflix, by the way. And it's really recommended, yeah. My daughters, suggested that I watch it with them because they heard about it from school, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'm mentioning this because I asked them to write down, one of the things that she said, that Mrs. Michelle Obama said during her this really highly recommended movie, when talking to a group of students, women students, lady students. And she said that, and she spoke there about feeling or being invisible as a woman, you know, in different phases in her life or their lives as young women. And she said, I never felt invisible. This is what she said. And I think that in thinking through my story about why I do not now feel invisible, it was because my parents always made me feel visible. And she said another thing that I found it really very very inspiring, that I'm just trying to remember her exact words, that we cannot actually wait for the world to be equal, and to start, yes, and we to start feeling seen, and that we need, that we're still far from it, unfortunately. Although I can myself say that I witness a lot of you know, a lot of effort and many to tackle this, but we're still very far from equality, and this is something that it's right not only for Israel and Australia, but I think that to many, you know, countries around the world. And what Mrs. Obama says, actually, that it all goes back, you know, to education, and to how girls are treated in their own homes and in schools and in, you know, and it starts there. So this is like a very general, my general insights about it, but.
No, it's amazing. And I think it's beautiful actually that you watched it with your girls, and they're seeing, you know, they're currently in Australia seeing their mum doing something amazing on an international stage. So that should be really empowering for them as well. And hopefully that there is sort of, you know, yeah, we can't wait for the world to be equal, but hopefully there is some sort of upward tick where we don't even need to be talking about whether we're equal, not equal, we just are, you know. And so that was beautiful. So I think that we might go on to some interfaith work that you've done, if that's all right. If I could ask you a question about the dialogue group, or if you could tell our audience a little bit about what the dialogue group was that you were a part of.
Yes, if I may, just a minute, Emily. I'm really sorry. Something went wrong with my computer. I'm sorry. So
I was just going to do a dance for everybody while we waited, but I didn't think that anyone wanted to see. Also, like, I'm wearing pajamas on the bottom, so I couldn't stand up.
Yeah. So before I go, you know, I'll be happy to refer to that as well. But if I may say, you know, following what we've just said about women and women's rights, and I think that we should, it's worth mentioning that along with you and with other really valuable partners in the Jewish community and in the general you know, community here in Australia, that the embassy does hope to also lead some collaborations, bilateral collaborations, also to increase awareness of the whole and hopefully maybe to lead initiatives to increase, you know, awareness of domestic violence, and of having more initiatives to tackle those also in the you know, in on the bilateral level. And of course, I hope that later on we'll be able also to talk about that, and you know, to present some of those projects in the future. Some of them, of course, we hope to lead with you, with the ZFA, with the Federation, and it is a pleasure, you know, for me, knowing that as a diplomat, as an Israeli diplomat, sometimes I can also contribute in this manner. And so this is just, you know, as a summary of the previous question. Now,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think that this period of time, especially since we've all been at home, it's, you know, I sort of, when we were told we were going into lockdown, I just thought, okay, we're great, we're safe in the home, whatever we do, whatever happens, if we stay at home, we're fine. And I think I kind of took for granted the fact that not everybody feels safe in their home. So I started to see on Facebook, and I actually thought it was an amazing grassroots thing that was happening in Israel, actually, on the issue of domestic violence, where people were putting up posts in, and they had it in English, Hebrew, and Arabic, and maybe even Russian. And it was basically a message to women that are on Facebook that if they don't feel safe in the home and they don't feel safe enough to be able to reach out and say they're not safe in the home because either somebody's monitoring what they're writing or whatever, to come to a friend or come to somebody on Facebook. And it was just something banal, like, and tell everybody and ask them if they're still selling the makeup. And that question, are you still selling the makeup I would like to buy, is a trigger to show the person that they're reaching out to ask for help. And that was just one of the things that I noticed during this time. And you know, there's been also demonstrations and stuff against domestic violence, but this really grassroots thing of making sure that everybody feels safe in the home, but also making those of us aware that wouldn't necessarily have understood it before, that not everybody is. And I think that the work that we're going to do, and we'll be able to talk about it more at another time, is really trying to find a way to bring the grassroots and also on that, you know, higher up level together to try and create more awareness, to try and create more of a network, so that women can feel empowered and
safer.
Safer, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I fully agree. So concerning the interfaith project that you've just asked about, so first of all, this is something that I was involved in when I was much younger than today. Yeah, this is something that I was involved in as a young student. But the nice thing that it was a kind of initiative that I have to say that has given me the also the knowledge, but also the importance of the of having it's not interfaith or multicultural dialogue about issues like the Holocaust, for example, in Israel. Also among Arab groups or the Druze, of course, society. So this is something that gave me this. First of all, it gave me personally the opportunity to learn more about the Holocaust, and it allows me the opportunity to discuss it with different groups back then. And later on, and during my during the years prior to my joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when I was a teacher as well, and later on a coordinator of a project, educational project in different villages in the northern part of Israel. I also back then I had the opportunity to present and to discuss the whole issue of the Holocaust and the way that also different groups, non-Jewish groups, could refer to it. And when becoming a diplomat, an Israeli diplomat, and despite the fact that I am not, Jewish myself, I still I still find this issue highly fascinating, and I do think that. And I have been, I had this, I've got the opportunity also in Australia to be involved in some events and even leading them. For example, the exhibition that we had a few months ago in Sydney in the New South Wales Parliament, where we actually presented a very touching, very interesting exhibition of the righteous among the nations, diplomats righteous among the nations, who presented the stories of diplomats during the World War II, who saved each diplomat from different national backgrounds, and how each and every diplomat managed to save Jews and during the Holocaust. I also had the opportunity to lead it is a part of my responsibility in the embassy actually to organize events and ceremonies for the Australian Righteous Among the Nations. We do have some families and Australian families who who needs to be awarded for their grandparents and great-grandparents who also were involved in saving Jews. And yes, I find this always very, very touching, of course. And the fact that I could in different, in different places and during my different positions to present this also to non-Jewish groups in Israel and to discuss it more, deeper. I think that this is a great privilege, and so this is like very general about yeah.
That's really remarkable. We have actually a few questions, if you don't mind. A lot of interest going back to like the Druze society in Israel. So somebody either on Facebook or here on Zoom asked, what is the global population of Druze, if you know? And also, and this is an interesting question which I wanted to ask before, are the Druze in Israel in contact with their relatives that may live in Syria and Lebanon? Is there or do they have relatives? And somebody asked if you had relatives, would that in Syria or Lebanon, would that cause a problem in getting a diplomatic position?
First of all, about the numbers of the Druze population. So this is, of course, very approximate, what I'm going to say. I'm not sure, I don't have the exact figures, but in Israel, we combine something like 2.2% of the total population. So it's quite a small society in Israel. It's almost 130,000 Jews all over Israel. In Syria, it's a bigger population. We have there, if I'm not mistaken, over 700,000 people or 8,000 people, 800,000 people. So I think that the Syrian, I'm sure that the Syrian Druze population is the biggest in the Middle East. Of course, in Lebanon, we also have Druze, and there, I think it's around the 300,000 Druze, if I'm not mistaken. In Jordan, it's a very, very small community, and we're talking about tens of thousands there. But we do have a Druze population in the United States, in some of the states. We do have Druze population in Latin America. Mostly in Brazil, in Venezuela, if I'm not, I think that we do have there as well. And maybe there are other places as well, but I'm not so sure, I have to admit.
And chat actually, I did a bit of a Google and I saw that there's a bit of a Druze population in Australia as well. But
yes, in Adelaide mostly, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't got the chance to meet any of them so far, but in Adelaide, yes, there are a few thousand of people. Again, small community, not so big, but they're mostly there.
And so just touching back on the question, do people have relatives that would live in Israel and across the border in Syria or Lebanon, and would that cause an issue, or is it? So
first of all, most of the Druze families in Israel. So we even have the same names of families in Syria and in Lebanon. So we originated from these countries. moving to what we know as Israel today, hundreds of years ago. But yes, originally the Druze society in Israel comes from both Lebanon and Syria. So we even share the same family names in some cases. I've never been in touch with any relatives either in Syria and Lebanon, again, because my immediate family has been in Israel for hundreds of years ago. We are aware of if I'm not sure about the English word in this regard, the blood connection maybe, or but still, it's we don't mostly. We haven't maintained these relations. Again, and it does bring us back, Emily, to previous questions that you posed about our, national affiliation, and the fact that so the Druze people anywhere, not only in Israel, usually they feel highly affiliated with their homeland countries. And because of the very sad reality in the Middle East, and the fact that neighboring countries like Israel and Syria don't have any diplomatic relations, that of course affects also the relations between the Israeli Druze and the Syrian Druze. And we respect it and we live by it. There were times, by the way, during the Syrian crisis, that the Druze community in Israel did offer and even was able to send some aid and some, to our relatives in Syria. But usually we're talking about very independent societies, and first of all, they're Syrians and we're Israelis, and for the time being, unfortunately, there are a lot of limitations. So we wish them all the best, of course, and whenever there's a possibility to help and assist, we'll always do it. But we also understand, the complexity of their situation, and they understand ours. So yeah, this is very briefly.
And we're sort of running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you in terms of what's next for you. So you're in Australia for a few more years. Do you then go on to go to another country? Do you have political aspirations?
Yeah, so from here we'll be back to Israel, because I did have a back-to-back 2 missions, diplomatic missions. So that means that once my mission is done here, I'm going right back to Israel. I need to stay there for a few years until I get back to my next posting. So I'll be here for a while now.
We're very happy to have you for as long as you'll be here, and then we'd love
I'm very happy to be here. So yeah, thank you very much.
We'd also love to come and visit you when you're back in Israel. We'd love to come and visit you in.
Please, please do.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, Eman. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and I will hand you back to Bren to give the formal thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. It was really my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Eman, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed tonight's conversation, learning so much about Druze society, and not just Druze society's place in Israel, but your attempts to better integrate your own society into Israel and to create mutual understanding. I thought it was just wonderful. The conversation on domestic violence, which is as much of a problem in Israel as it is in Australia, is sobering, and yeah, and any, I'm sure everyone watching this would strongly encourage any and all bilateral cooperation between Australia and Israel in order to reduce the levels in both countries. Eman, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you also, since we were unable to, because of the technical glitch a month or so ago, we couldn't hold you then. So thank you for making yourself available once more tonight. Emily, thank you so much. I will see you in a month or two when restrictions are finally eased. But I'm sure I'll speak to you before then. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. As I said, we will have a special event, a panel discussion next week. It will start at the time of 7 p.m, not 8 p.m. That is, of course, in the Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we will send information out about that soon. So have a good evening, have a good week, and we will see you next week.